it's been kind of intriguing me why in the history of cinema at the Academy Awards a sci-fi film has never been able to win the big prize, the mainstream Academy Award for the Best Picture or Director. And I, as a voter myself, I thought finally 2 years ago there was Avatar, and there was really nothing to compare it with. This film broke. Star Wars is credited with changing cinema as a landmark in the terms of the way the whole cinema industry went after that, and the blockbusters and the sequels, and the fantasy elements and all of this, and connecting to a public for the first time with science fiction. And I thought when I saw when I saw Avatar in the cinemas in 3D, I thought, wow, here's the next revolution. It was undeniable, and audiences around the world embraced it, and it was innovative. The storytelling was great. Everything about this film, it was a major, huge achievement, and that's what we're supposed to vote for at the Academy Awards. And it got locked out for a small little film, and not to denigrate the fact that she was the first woman Oscar winner, and the film was, about a subject in Iraq and all of this stuff. But in terms of a worthy winner of an Academy Award, in a way, that year, Avatar got locked out, and there was definitely a reason for it. Some say it was prejudiced against Cameron, and they wanted his wife to win, and all this stuff. But I think it was deeper than that. And sorry,
of populism versus quality, the idea that what's popular is not quality material. I suppose that's part of the ideology that they're looking for something, the voters are supposed to be looking for something which encapsulates the entire human experience, and not, some kind of subgenre aimed at 15, 16-year-olds with PG or 12 certificates. Could that be a factor?
I think it's a big factor. I think, my interest has been piqued this year because there's been, in the last week alone, I've read 3 articles here in Canada. One in Vancouver, I was just there, which has a huge picture of the Oscar and Spielberg in front of it, and its title is "Who Votes?" and it's all about the Oscars, and they explain the demographics of the Oscar voters are now predominantly over 65 and white. There's very few black members. There's very few um, un-American, say, members, and I think that those come from the generations where I knew it growing up, and I knew it even recently still, that science fiction literature itself is always disregarded as an inferior culture to real literature. And I think that's definitely come across into the movie industry. Um, and there's a definite, it's almost a prejudice against it. And I think that in the end, and there was another article here I just read today that saying, how do you win an Oscar? And it shows the demographics of, is it a political film? Is it a biopic? Is it this? Is it that? And it's all the demographics that fit the category to get yourself to where you can win one. And there does seem, if one went back and looked at the history of the Oscars, predominantly there's a certain amount of film, a certain amount of actors' performance would win. And so I long kind of thought, and it's different. It's not comedy. It's not drama. It's not biopic. I know those are different categories, but in a way, science fiction should have its own category at the Oscars. So therefore, it would be removed from, at the moment, a kind of, it is almost a prejudice against it.
There are those who would argue that it further ghettoizes science fiction to actually give it its own category, in that it could never then be nominated for Best Picture. That would mean Avatar could never have been Best Picture had there been a sci-fi Oscar.
Yeah, that's true, but one would prefer to see it included in the categories. But with the history so far, where it's never got a chance, maybe that would be the only way that it would get the recognition. And these demographics going to change. There's a lot of younger filmmakers in there now. There's a lot of different audience in there now who've become members of the Academy. So I think it is going to change. It may take a few years, but it will turn around. And the young blood is coming in, and it's increasing. You know that you get membership of the Academy by being nominated or winning an Academy Award, but you could buy your way in. You could pay, and as long as you got nominated by two members who were already members. And I think a lot of people joined in the 70s, 80s like that. Since then, I think the Academy now I've noticed in their recent literature they put out that they've now become much more restrictive. They want to preserve the kind of integrity of the Academy. And it's, what was it set up for? It was set up for members of the film industry to judge their fellow peers in all the different categories on the quality of filmmaking. At the moment, according to this article, it's very high in the over 65s who live in Los Angeles and around those areas. So they have a certain view of what cinema is, and I don't think many of them would pay and go to see a science fiction film, to be honest. So I think that now the younger members are coming in, and science fiction films, they're slowly getting nominated. So those people will be coming in to the mainstream now. And I guess technical, we all vote. So even if you come in under technical awards, and a lot of science fiction gets technical awards every year. So maybe those people will slowly the membership will be increasing. But and it's not, this is not my only category. Last year, I voted for The King's Speech above everything else because it was a wonderful film that stayed in your head. It was a small British film, but it was the best, I thought, there. So one judges every year on what's out there. But we talked earlier, if you look at the history of films that have not got it, Star Wars, Alien, Close Encounters, 2001, Blade Runner, Minority Report, Solaris, Inception. These are all, they're great filmmaking. It's undeniable. Whatever the subject matter is, whether it's science fiction or whatever it's called, they're great filmmaking. Batman, actually, the last Batman should have been up there, I think. It's a stunningly made film and well told. Everything in it's innovative. Each time the effects get better, all this stuff. So, and I hear this argument, Lord of the Rings, we gave that one Oscar, but it's fantasy. It's not science fiction. There's a clear distinction in the history of literature between fantasy literature and science fiction literature.
Back to my earlier point that if we get a sci-fi Oscar, then suddenly the fantasy people will want one, the horror people, the most ignored.
Right. I know. There is the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy and Horror Films. That is a separate academy, which is growing, and that has given, obviously, those films its own awards. And maybe that's the category at the Oscars. It should include all of those. Maybe it should be a special Oscar for fantasy, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Horror films are just as viable, and there are some great ones. And I think probably The Exorcist is the only film that got an Academy Award, and well deserved. But
the remit of the Academy, as far as I can tell, is to give an award to a film which encompasses something very important about the general human experience, and it really shouldn't matter if it's a period film. I mean, a period film is genre, just like sci-fi. If it's a horror film,
yeah.
I mean, really, story should count, drama should count, the emotional impact on people should count, and yet there's this prejudice just because there might be a few spaceships flying around.
Yes. No, it's. I've cited earlier that I think if you look at the writers, I take a few. I'm not leaving anybody out, but just take William Gibson, Frank Herbert, Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick, if you like. These are master writers. They're hugely popular, and there's nothing wrong in that. But they were always in a category that was kind of, especially the British literary establishment, always looked down on them. This was like populist stuff that really doesn't count. But
Well, when you think of Philip K. Dick writing, virtually impoverished, starving, and taking speed to knock out a novel a week, I mean, it just gives you
yeah,
some idea of. And yet now, try and buy a Philip K. Dick script, the man is completely golden. But
yeah,
yeah, a lot of science fiction, we were saying earlier, was can be difficult to adapt. Some of the best writers, such as Kurt Vonnegut, who had a notable 70s success with Slaughterhouse-Five,
yes,
and some of the others, they're really all Hollywood can do with it in a pitch is say, well, where are the girls? Where are the spaceships? Where's Act 1, 2, and 3? And these books are these books are not written like that.
true. I mean, I know I'm in the middle of it now. We're adapting Stanislav Lem's Memories Found in a Bathtub, and I think nearly every Lem book, when you read it, is just an incredible exploration of the human mind and the human being and its place in the world, especially under communism, how he related that, because he could not write about his own world. He'd have been tortured and put in prison because he wasn't allowed to. So he wrote about it, framing it into the world of science fiction, whereby he escaped the authorities. And that was his way around that. Even Tarkovsky making Solaris made it as metaphors, and Stalker, he couldn't have made those films exposing the regime that he was kind of making a film about. He didn't like Solaris, but you have to adapt it. We've had to completely adapt his book because of the way it was written in the 60s, 70s. And, his view of America was women made coffee and painted their nails. That was it. They had no presence in there. That's all changed. And also the advent of internet and web and the revolution that's gone on in the last few years. If he was writing now, it would be a completely different literature. So one has to adapt to that. And Solaris did it beautifully. The remake with Clooney is a really, really good film, I thought. So, and it's funny, when I was young, I was thinking about something just now. I remember with my kids, they say, what can we go and see? And I said, let's see what's got the worst critics. I was in England, and Contact got absolutely slated. And I said, let's go and see that one. So we went and see that. And at the end, my kids were like 15 and 12, 13. And they both said, this is a really good film. Why do they all like this, so much against it? And I said, it's science fiction. And it was a really good film. It was exploring fantastic ideas. It didn't deserve the absolute trashing that it got. Nor did 2001, nor did Blade Runner. I mean, none of these films, they all got trashed to hell by critics, because I still say it's a prejudice, because they were science fiction.
Well, I think science fiction possibly has taken is seen as analogous to and comparable to horror, in that you expect a certain very, very small number of things to happen, and they think, all right, horror's a genre, science fiction's a genre. Science fiction, we're going to get spaceships, blah blah blah. Horror, we're going to get guys in the woods getting killed. And yet, science fiction is such a broader area, and I think that might be part of the public perception, in that it's extremely limited, when in fact it's as films as diverse as Star Wars and Solaris prove can encompass the entire range of human experience, from exciting adventures to deep looks into the human soul, Kafkaesque.
Yes, very much so. And I mean, I think we were talking earlier that had a cool period and a hot period, that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was the Cold War. Russians were the bad guys, and they were easily portrayed in Hollywood movies. And then they went away, so aliens became the bad guys. And there was this whole, from Independence Day on, they were the great bad guys we could go and make films about. And then that slightly went away when Al Qaeda and all of this um, terrorism now has become the world's enemy, and that's slightly taken place now. There's a lot of war movies and anti-Muslim movies and all this stuff going on. So, yeah, science fiction kind of lost its bad guys for the moment. Yes.
I asked you earlier on consideration if you would prefer that the Academy matured and began to consider all films as potential fodder for nominations, including sci-fi, or if you would prefer a particular category which risks to kind of possibly sideline sci-fi into its own, keep it in its own ghetto. I mean, how are you? I mean, how do you feel about that? Would you rather have the sci-fi Oscar, or would you rather the Academy?
Well, due to its history, one would hope that if there was a separate category, some of these films would have got huge recognition for in amongst the peers at the Oscars, and it's not the be all and end all. The audience is the end. They're the choosers. They make the films the winners or not.